Good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of the Planning and Highways Committee. I'll hand over to Abby for housekeeping. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards, the assembly point is Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I'd like now to all the councillors to introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself. I'm Alan Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield, and I'm chairing the meeting today. Henry, please.
Councillor Henry Nottage, substituting for Brian Holmeshaw.
Mike.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Chaplin, Councillor for Southey Ward.
Anne.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor for the Manor Castle Ward and I'm substituting for Peter Price.
Nia.
Niga Bashara, Councillor for Netheredge and Sherrill Ward.
Tony.
Councillor Tony Downing, Councillor for Mosborough Ward. Thank you.
Diane.
Good afternoon, my name's Diane Hurst. I'm a member for Richmond Ward.
Roger.
Good afternoon, my name is Roger Davison and I'm Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Bob.
Councillor Bob McCann, I'm Councillor for Bayton Ward.
Cliff.
Hello, I'm Councillor Cliff Woodcraft, Councillor for Fulwood Ward.
Tom.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Tom Hunt. I'm a Councillor for Walkley Ward and I'm a substitute for Councillor Gary Weatherall.
Barbara.
Good afternoon, I'm Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies? Have we? Any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies for absence from Councillor Tony Dams and his sub is Councillor Tom Hunt, Councillor Brian Holmeshaw and his sub is Councillor Henry Nottage, Councillor Peter Price and his sub is Councillor Tony Downing, and Councillor Gary Weatherall and his sub is Councillor Anne Murphy. I might have those the wrong way round. But...
Thanks, Abby. We don't have any exclusion of public or press, no? Do we have any declarations of interest, members? Can we go through the minutes of the previous meeting? Held on the 12th of July, page 9, sorry.
Chair. Yes, under item 3, declarations of interest, 3.1, it states that Councillor Mike Chaplin declared a personal interest in agenda item 7B. That related to Southbourne Road, so I think that was unlikely that I would have declared an interest on that item. It must be some other councillor.
Thanks, Mike. Page 10. Page 11. Thank you. Site visits, the dates will be put into members' diaries of the next site visits. Thank you. We now move to item 7, tree preservation order number 449, 60 Sandygate Park Road. Sheffield Town. Office of the... Not you, Chris? Oh, sorry, are you there? Yep, sorry.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Lyons. I'm Community Tree Officer. And I'm bringing forward TPO number 449, seeking confirmation today. TPO that's been placed on a Metasequoia glyptus stroboides, or adorned redwood, which is positioned in the centre of the rear garden at 60 Sandygate Park. This TPO was actually made on the basis of a request from the lady and her family who own number 60. The tree is commemorative. It was planted by their late grandfather, or her late husband. It's anticipated that the house is soon going to change hands, and they wish to make provisions for the tree to be retained when this occurs. You can actually see a photograph of the tree on both of the two screens there. In considering the amenity of the tree is fully visible from the house and partially visible from neighbouring properties, and it's also partially visible from the street, where it can be seen clearly in the gap between the houses and also over the roof of the house. This is a tree of quite large stature that is yet to reach its full height, which is approximately 30 metres, I believe. So this is a tree that's going to become more apparent in the street scene as time goes on. The tree's called High Lay on the tempo form. It's of a pleasing symmetric shape. It's got no major defects. It's notably in sort of a focal position within the garden, where it can grow unfettered to its full size. And I think this is a good example of the right tree in the right place. In terms of its future potential as an amenity, the tree is estimated as being about 40 years of age. I think the lady in question told me that the tree came actually as a sapling from America, and it was planted 40 years ago. It's got a life expectancy of about 100 years, and the open aspect of the garden means that the tree should be able to grow unimpeded to maturity. So I think this tree represents excellent future potential as an amenity. The tree garnered some points for rarity because this tree it's the sole living species of its genus. So this is a tree that was thought to be extinct prior to 1941. And it was only really known through fossil records from over 150 million years ago. It was discovered or rediscovered growing in China in 1941, which I think is its native range. And following from that, the seeds were sort of dispersed by botanists who were keen to see the tree thrive in other areas where its growth would be supported. It's endangered in its native range. I can't say that it's incredibly rare within the UK. We've actually got quite a few of them growing in the town centre as a result of some quite innovative planting by Sheffield City Council. But it's not an overly common tree, and I think it's fair to say it's comparatively rare in the area of Sheffield in which this tree is planted. The second part of assessing the tree for protection is to consider whether it's expedient, and with regards to expediency, there is no imminent threat to this tree. Other than that when the house is sold, there will be no protection on the tree because it isn't in a conservation area, and so it could be removed with impunity. So I have noted that the expediency is precautionary only. However, government guidance in respect of making TPOs recognises that such precautionary TPOs are appropriate. And just to quote from an excerpt from the government guidance, we may consider other sources of risk to trees with significant amenity value, and that changes in property ownership and intentions to fell trees are not always known in advance, so it may sometimes be appropriate to proactively make orders as a precaution. In this instance, I feel that the tree does have really good amenity value, and it is a tree that I would like to see preserved. So yeah, I'm seeking confirmation of the TPO. Thank you. I'm sorry, there have been no objections to this TPO being made.
Thank you, Vanessa. Do we have any members' questions? Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering about being a tree from abroad, whether it has any vulnerabilities. I mean, could it get ash dye back or something like that and harbour it? You know, I don't understand tree diseases at all, but are there any risks in that line?
My understanding is that these trees grow relatively well in climates such as ours, you know, and I'm not aware of any particular disease that this species of tree in the UK would harbour, it wouldn't be susceptible to ash dieback. I can say that. The tree in question certainly appeared healthy, without any sort of defects or pathogens that would give me cause for concern. So I'm not worried about it in terms of it harbouring a pathogen which may spread to other native trees.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Do we have any members' comments?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think, to be honest, I think this tree is of some value, obviously, to the people that put it there in the first place. And being as there are no objections, I can't see why we should, I certainly wouldn't want to be refusing it. Thank you.
Diane?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really happy to support this proactive piece of work. It's a good example of a tree, very beautiful, right place, and will make a contribution to the community. And I thank the owner of the property and the officer for bringing this report to us. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm going to echo the same as well. I think there's sentiments attached to it, and for the resident to actually put this forward, I think it's kind of like touched me as well. But at the same time, when it's mentioned that it's the tree at the right place, being healthy, no defect, and I think I would support it and value the sentiments attached to it. It's touched me, I think, as well.
Thank you. Any further comments? No, we'll go to a vote, starting with you, Henry. For or against?
For.
Mike?
For the preservation order.
For the preservation order.
Hiccup?
For.
Tony?
For the preservation order.
Ben?
For the preservation order, Chair.
Roger?
For the preservation order, Chair.
Bob?
For the preservation order, Chair.
Cliff?
For the preservation order, Chair.
Tom?
For.
Barbara?
For the preservation order. Thank you.
Thank you, members. That's passed. We now move to item 8, tree preservation order number 450, which is 5 Cawthorne Grove, which is page 23 of the agenda. Thank you, Vanessa.
So I'm seeking confirmation of tree preservation order number 450, which is at 5 Cawthorne Grove, which is in S8. Again, there's an image of the tree up on the screens. This TPO was made on the 5th of May this year to protect a mature beech tree which is positioned in the front garden of 5 Cawthorne Grove. In April 2022, again this year, sorry, a request to TPO the tree was received by the council from a local tree action group. They stated that they'd received information from a tree surgeon who had been asked for a quote to fell the tree. The tree is not in a conservation area, so again, there would be nothing to prevent removal of the tree. We at the council therefore responded by going to inspect the tree to assess its suitability for protection. This inspection was carried out by myself on the 29th of April from roadside only. And the way that I scored the tree is within the tempo form, which you'll find included within the report. The tree reached a score of 13 points, which gave an indication that the tree should be considered for protection. We have 2 objections that have been received regarding the tree, which are again contained within the report, along with my response to the points raised in that, and I believe we do have a speaker here today as well. Just to discuss the amenity assessment of the tree. This is a reasonably large tree. It's approximately 15 metres high with a canopy spread of about 20 metres, and it stands directly adjacent to the road with Cawthorne Grove, where it's very visible. It's also partially visible from Archer Road, which is quite a busy road. With regards to its form and condition, my inspection was conducted from roadside only, and this indicated the tree to be of quite open, pleasing form, got a well-balanced, relatively symmetrical canopy, and it's got a small cavity at about 2 metres, which was facing roadside, but this was commensurate with branch loss and not something that I was overly concerned about. At the time of inspection, the tree had yet to create all of its leaves, so the picture that you can see, the canopy is somewhat more sparse than it probably is now. It having quite a full canopy at the moment, indicating that the tree's got quite good vitality. There was an aerial inspection of the tree conducted by a consultant on the behalf of the owner of 5 Cawthorne Road and submitted as part of an objection. But within this report, the consultant himself states that the tree is a fine specimen. He notes that there are 2 cavities and a broken branch visible only from the rear of the tree, but photographs of these supplied within the report indicate cavities of a sort routinely found on mature beech, and they're not in themselves immediate cause for concern, and the consultant concludes that the cavities are not structurally significant. He also notes that he doesn't have any particular dispute with the scores awarded by myself with regards to elements of the assessment regarding the tree's condition, lifespan and visibility. With regards to its future potential as an amenity, I've given it a really conservative estimate of 20 to 40 years, meaning that the tree represents good future potential. It's got sufficient space to grow to maturity without encountering any issues, and the sort of pruning that may be needed to address encroachment towards the road is going to be minimal and not impact on the tree's condition or particularly on its look, on its visual appeal. With regards to the sort of other factors that we're asked to consider, I can't really argue for rarity or historic or commemorative importance here, as I don't have any evidence for that. But one of the things that I do consider, although it doesn't gain the tree a point really in this regard, is that it forms part of a really small green corridor which runs along Cawthorne Grove and which softens an otherwise really urban view. This offers ecosystem benefits to adjacent properties and wildlife benefits to a variety of different species. And I think as the trees nearest to you are the ones that you see most often, this tree does have amenity value to the people who live near to it. There is an element of the tempo assessment which refers to suitability of the tree for its location, with the implication that trees which aren't suitable have a point deducted. I didn't deduct a point from this tree because I do think it is an appropriate place. It does have room to grow to maturity. It has already reached a decent size without really needing any major intervention. And given that a recent iTree survey of Sheffield notes that we have a comparative lack of large trees, the retention of specimens which can reach maturity in the situation they're planted, I think, should be taken into consideration. With regards to expediency, it's expedient to make an order if the authority believe there is a risk of the tree being felled, pruned or damaged in a way that would have a significant impact on the amenity of the area. I think the tree brings sufficient degree of amenity to the area to consider preserving it, and we've received information that we must view as credible regarding the intention to fell the tree. So I'm seeking confirmation of the order today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I have one speaker, Mr. Bill Anderson. If you take there and press the button on the right, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Vanessa raises a couple of things. Firstly, the tempo score. She's given it 3 points for the conceivable threat because she's been told that someone was asked for a quotation to remove the tree. We don't know that that's true. This is a statement made by a tree action group, and we don't know who the tree action group are either. So I think if we were going to make a precautionary TPO here, using the tempo system, it should have got 1 point, not the 3 that Vanessa gave it. If it had got 1 point, it wouldn't meet the threshold for protection. So that's my first point. I'd also like to refer you to photograph 6 in my report, which I think is in the pack, but it's black and white rather than colour. And it shows a fairly horrible tree wound. Now it shows 2 fairly horrible tree wounds. I don't think that they're structurally significant, but it does suggest that it's a tree with a history of branch failure. nobody has any intention of cutting this tree down at this moment, but I really would say I don't think it's the sort of tree that we should be protecting with a tree preservation order. Thank you.
Vanessa, would you like to come back?
Thank you. Yeah, I think maybe the tree has lost branches, as you state, but perhaps they've been removed. We simply don't know. You know, the reference within the report is that these aren't structurally significant, and that's what I'm considering here. You know, is this tree that has got future potential as an amenity? I think with regards to the expediency, I have to take information such as that seriously. You know, I can't sort of disregard it. It's been indicated that there is an intention to remove the tree has no other protection. Therefore, you know, based on any lack of evidence to state that that information isn't credible, I must assess the tree's amenity and then assess the tree for protection via the serving of a TPO.
Thank you, Vanessa. Members' questions yet, Roger?
One of the, excuse me, one of the problems that was raised was that of the roots. Can these roots be contained, or can you tell us how much further they will grow, and what is the potential damage if they do grow? Thank you.
Is this in reference to the damage to the drain that's been noted? Yeah, okay. The tree will exploit the soil volume around it, and to some extent tree roots can move around and under obstructions, but at the very sort of end of the root, the point which is questing through the soil, that root really doesn't exert very much pressure. And I think with reference to the broken drain, I make note in the report that the tree will exploit a break in the drain and go into it in terms of seeking water and nutrients, but those roots don't, as far as the evidence suggests, break the drain in order to do that. So the implication that the tree has broken the drain, I don't think is correct. It will exploit a drain that isn't well maintained. But as far as I understand, that drain has now been fixed. So if it's been fixed well, I don't see that there should be a problem with regards to the tree and the drain coexisting. I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable in the preemptive removal of a tree in case it broke a drain, because that would set a precedent for removal of lots of trees across the city. And as far as I'm aware, there isn't any other implication of it damaging anything else. You know, often with trees in a built environment, we see them in direct conflict with buildings all the time, particularly with regards to their branches, you know, encroaching towards walls, etc., and needing to be pruned in a way that then damages their amenity. This isn't the case here. This is a tree that can grow to a large size. So I'm not convinced that the argument for damage is sufficient for me to be worried at this point.
One of the questions that I asked was how much further the roots will grow.
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, I think it stands in an elevated position above the road, so it will spread, the roots will spread towards the point at which there is an obstruction. I can't tell you exactly how far away from the stem of the tree that will be with this particular tree, but it will be contained within that soil area. It will also grow back towards the house. But I think this is a tree, as far as I understand it, that's at the end of a 40-metre garden. So with regards coming into direct conflict with the house, it's got a long way to go. And this tree has been there for a long time, and as far as I'm aware, there isn't any evidence of damage so far. So it will exploit the soil as far as it can, but it's going to be contained by the built environment around it, the walls, the paths, and the foundations of the house.
Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to address bullet point 4, if I may, on the objections. Root damages occurred to the pavement of Cawthorne Grove. I know, leading to uneven surface, I know in lots of instances, tree roots are very shallow, right? And if this is the case and it's damaging the footpath, is there anything that we can do to mitigate that, to try and resolve that issue? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, we quite often see bumping of routes under tarmac. It's usually quite a simple measure for paths to be fixed. It happens across the city on a regular basis all the time. There are two options: either the tarmac can be made completely flat if the route isn't in the way, or it can be humped in such a way that it doesn't provide a trip hazard, so there isn't kind of an edge that's proud. I'm trying to think back to the state of the pavement when I was last under the tree. I don't sort of particularly remember the damage to the pavement being very significant, but it can be remedied, is the answer.
Okay. Yeah. So what would happen in this case then? Would they cut part of the route away before they resurfaced, or how would they deal with that, please?
I think it would depend on what they found when they lifted up the tarmac. So yeah, route pruning is an option, route shaving is an option, or as I've said, leaving the route intact if it's particularly important structurally, and then humping the pavement so that it can go over the route and not create the trip hazard. There would be a variety of options.
Henry?
Hi, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to comment on the other factors part of the tempo evaluation. I did some quick research into what lives in a beech tree, and it supports several species of moths and moth caterpillars. The seeds are eaten by mice, voles and squirrels, and the gnarled and knotted sections as created by the previous bough failures that have left the cavities as identified in the photos, provide habitat for a variety of deadwood specialists. And in light of the catastrophic decline in the insect population and local biodiversity, I would have welcomed it being identified as having an identifiable habitat importance, which would have raised the score. And in terms of the expediency, it's my opinion that the objection to the TPO in itself provides a perceived threat, if not a foreseeable. So the total score wouldn't have fallen below the threshold if it had gone down to the 2. That's my comment.
Vanessa?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say thank you for the points that you've raised there. That's all I have to say.
Do we have any members' comments? Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, last time I walked along that road, I remember sort of looking at that tree in the adjoining slot and thinking, gosh, I wonder if that's going to be right for development, simply because of the way sort of the ground is at the moment. And I looked at this TPO and looked at sort of, the point raised about sort of expediency. And I could see, I mean, and this was before I knew anything about the preservation order, I would rate that as a perceived threat because it looked as if that was the intention for that strip of land facing that road. So even though I tried to sort of justify in my mind reducing it to precautionary only, I could not get below the 2 for that and all the other comments. So I ended up at 12, not 13, but 12, which just is the right side of a TPO. Thank you.
Okay, any more comments? Sorry, you can't. No, you've had your 5 minutes.
I'm being accused of things here that I've not done. You know, I haven't been asked to
I'm sorry, but you've had your 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Can I clarify? No, can I just clarify? I knew nothing about TPO at this stage. I remember thinking about the way that street is constructed, because sort of there's a lot of development of piecemeal land in the city, including sort of my ward. It just crossed my mind. So I looked at this thinking sort of, it's a huge responsibility on the owner of a bit of land to actually have a tree on it with a TPO. So I was actually going through the criteria, trying to be sympathetic. And even the most sympathetic approach to it, including what I know of that road, I could not bring it down to below 12. And I can see why you can justify an 11, but on the whole street and looking at all the criteria, I just could not get below the 12. I'm sorry. You know, it's not accusing you of anything, it's not accusing your neighbours of anything, it is the perception of that road and what that tree does for the road and the potential for, not just that, a few things on the road. And it's not an accusation, I just think, but I do accept it's a huge responsibility of someone with a TPO on their land that, you know, it's an imposition on you, but it's also a reflection on the needs for other residents in the area. I'm sorry.
Do we have any further comments? No, move to the vote. Henry?
For the preservation order.
Mike?
For the preservation order.
Anne?
For the preservation order, Chair.
You got?
For the preservation order.
Tony?
For the preservation order.
Diane?
For, Chair.
Roger?
For, Chair.
Bob?
For, Chair.
Cliff?
For, Chair.
Tom?
For.
Barbara?
For, Chair.
That's passed, thank you very much. Right, we now move to item 9, applications of various acts and regulations. We only have one application to you today. Item 9A, application number 22/01205/full, University of Sheffield Innovation District, Sheffield S91XU, has been deferred. We have item 9B, application number 21/01636/FUL, 60 Little London Road, Sheffield, S8 OUH. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly introduce the item and then refer members to the supplementary information because there are quite a few changes in that, but I thought it's more straightforward if we just did a brief description first of all. So the site is as identified on the screen now, a long, thin site on Little London Road, sandwiched between Little London Road and the River Sheath. It's currently a vacant site in a somewhat derelict condition. There is housing on the western side of the river, to the south of the site, on both the east and western sides of the river, and then a mixture of commercial uses to the north and east. Some former industrial now converted to more sort of leisure-based uses, such as a play centre immediately opposite in the old Stokes paints factory. The application seeks approval for 14 apartments in a building of 3 floors, the ground floor of which is effectively a basement car park and other ancillary facilities such as cycle parking. So there is base parking within the basement for, I refer to it as basement, it's technically not because it's the ground floor, with little excavation. It contains 11 spaces and 14 cycle parking spaces. I mentioned the 14 apartments. There are also 2 Class E commercial units within the ground floor at the same level as the car park that front onto Little London Road. There's also a riverside walk proposed as part of the application, which would be secured by a legal agreement, hence the recommendation being to grant conditionally subject to the legal agreement. The site is within a fringe industry and business area in the Unitary Development Plan and is also identified as being within flood zones 2 and 3A. At this point, if I can just make reference to a possibly confusing element within the report where we refer to it being within flood zones 2 and 3A, and then the Environment Agency referring to it within flood zone 3B, functional floodplain. And that's because there's a very small slither of the site which is effectively the riverbank, which is within 3B. So, if you like, both references within the report are correct. Both the uses, housing and the commercial uses, are acceptable within the fringe industry and business area. Indeed, the commercial uses are potentially preferred uses within the location. I said earlier it's a 3-storey building. If you wouldn't mind moving on just a little bit with there, so thank you. You can see there the form of the building. That's showing the various elevations. It has, as you'll hopefully see on upcoming images, it's in 2 blocks. So that plancher there shows the top floor of the left-hand block as we're looking at it now, the red blob on that plan. You can see there's a green roof on the lower portion of that drawing. That's the same. It's the same for both blocks. The green roof across the full range of the roof, except for where solar panels are employed towards the London Road frontage. You can probably just pick them out on that image there. That form of building we feel is acceptable in the context. There's a range of development types within the area, predominantly 2-storey terrace dwellings on the western side, on the other side of the river, and a contemporary residential scheme on the former Abbey Glen site to the south, which is a sort of effectively a black or dark grey brick. This scheme has red brick and grey cladding, which reflects the traditional red brick material of the area and the introduction of the black brick on the adjacent site. We feel that's an appropriate scale for the site. If you could just move on, I think it's the next image, or maybe the one after that. Sorry, just bear with me. I've not got the presentation in front of me. There's an image which shows the relationship between the proposed building and the neighbouring ones. I think if you just move on a little, please, I can point to it when we get there. This one here. So you can see there the top image shows the left-hand corner of the top image shows the eaves height of the neighbouring contemporary black brick scheme, and you can see that the roof line of this meets that. So in that sense, it's quite a comfortable relationship. And then there's an existing red brick flat roof building to the right-hand side of the top right-hand corner. This building would be approximately 1 metre taller than that. Thank you. There are a number of objections. You members will see there's been significant objection to the proposals, particularly to the initial scheme prior to amendment. And a large part of that is concern about living conditions impacts for the occupants of the properties on the other side, on Coniston and Arnside Terrace, who have properties which face either face the site or adjoin the river. The report goes into quite some depth about those relationships. Yes, there are some slight shortfalls in our normal guidance, which is guidance rather than mandatory. But we feel, without going into detail, it's within the report, we feel that a lot of those concerns, all those concerns, have been either addressed through design changes, orientation of windows, etc., or justified in the context. The scheme enhances biodiversity on the site through the use of green roofs across a large proportion of the site, additional planting and naturalisation of the river frontage. and also by ridding the site of some invasive species which aren't helping at all at the moment with biodiversity. It's acceptable in flood risk terms in terms of its design, its flood protection. It allows some water flow onto the site in the event of a flood. There wasn't you'll note from the report the scheme didn't pass the sequential test. That wasn't submitted as part of this because it was understood that there are likely to be other sites where the scheme or a scheme of similar form could be accommodated on drier land. However, we felt that we've supported the applicant's case of this being allowing an exception to that policy, if you like, given the flood resilient measures that are in place and the benefits that we feel come from the scheme, particularly in the light of the tilted balance and the absence of a 5-year housing supply at the moment. Overall, we feel it's a positive, sustainable development of that currently vacant site, which has a derelict appearance, and hence the recommendation to support it. If I just now refer to the items in the supplementary information, I won't go through this verbatim, Chair, because we'll be here for a very long time, but I'll try and just pick out the key points. So it's the first item after the photographs in the supplementary information. The first point is additional representations. 2 additional representations have been received since drafting the original report. The first deals with essentially cycle parking provision, and we offer a response there that we don't feel that there is a realistic prospect of achieving additional cycle parking for customers, visitors to the commercial units along that site frontage, because the building is built right up to the back edge of the footway with very limited opportunity to include provision. However, the existing or the proposed cycle parking within the scheme is capable of being used by others as well as residents, and there are pockets of space within the car park where an additional stand could maybe be accommodated, but we feel that it's not appropriate to insist on that in this case. We think there's sufficient provision within the scheme, but that the scope exists for that to be provided by the operators if desired in the future. The second representation raises quite a lot more in terms of content. It's all set out there. Some of it is covered within is a repeat, if you like, of concerns that have already been expressed within the report. A couple of points to mention. There was a concern that the sun path analysis had only been taken in June. That's not actually correct. There was other times of the year as well, including September. The car parking issues have been covered within the report. There's a reference to the river walkway and the recommendation requiring the legal agreement to facilitate connection to adjoining sections. Realise that's not appropriate in the current situation where that route is fenced off, the existing route to the south, and indeed other routes to the north aren't provided. But that requirement is there to facilitate that provision. There's a reference there to sequential tests, the flood risk sequential test, which I've just referred to and explained why we feel that that's acceptable in this case. Then, Chair, there are a number of changes to conditions. Some of these are quite straightforward because they follow discussion with the applicant's agent in the build-up to the meeting and are simply just minor tweaks to the timing triggers within each condition. So that's applicable to condition 3, where it's just a change in the timing. Condition 10 and condition 11. Condition 32, we've reviewed that, taking account of this relates to the green roof and the time scale required for maintenance of that. And we feel that given unlike a normal landscape condition, which is there in the first instance to help us out look attractive, but also the other benefits that comes with it, once that's established after 5 years, it's taken as read that it will survive. Whereas the green roof has other functions such as biodiversity, sustainability, it helps with energy loss and all sorts of things. So we feel that's more critical to the long-term success of the scheme. So we've recommended an alteration, Chair, which involves the maintenance regime that comes forward, providing for maintenance for the lifetime of the development, as opposed to for 5 years. So that's condition 32. Condition 35 is amended to reflect a typing error in the original. They're referred to use class E3, which doesn't exist. So it's just class E for that. And then there are 2 additional conditions. The first relates to a specific measurement for surface water discharge, which does reduce the level of surface water discharge on the site, and that's at 9.7 litres per second. And then a second additional condition, which, again, following discussions with the agent, we've agreed that there should be some electric vehicle charging points within the car park, and that reflects those. So I think that's all, Chair. I'm sorry, that was quite a long introduction.
Thank you.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. Before I do leave that, it might be worth just quickly me briefly introducing the images on the presentation. I'm sorry about that. So this is a view on Little London Road with the site. The site is actually the gap between the flat roof building on the right and the grey coloured building in the distance. That's a closer view of the site. You can see it's in very poor condition at the moment. Again, that is the adjacent contemporary scheme, and you can also see the more traditional housing in the middle of the image, which is actually on the other side of the river. That's looking back towards the flat roof building, and just a reminder that this building is 1 metre taller than that. This is a view across the site where you can see the terraces on Coniston and Arnside Road and Arnside Terrace to the right there, and again there another image showing the same thing. So you can see that it is in quite close proximity to the site. The river is in between the site and those properties and their front gardens. That is a longer distance view of the site, but shows the recent Abbey Glen development in a bit more detail. These are the gardens of those properties on Arnside Terrace, and you'll note there's a communal, we've referred to a communal shared footway that runs in the front of the dwellings, and that's the one there just in front of that window, and the site is to the right on the other side of the trees. You can pick out the site there, and if you look very closely, the signage to the Stokes Paint Factory in line with that lighting column. And again there. I think that might be it. Sorry, these are some visuals of the site from Little London Road, showing the relationship with existing buildings and the form of the development tied up to back edge of footway. Sorry.
Thank you, Chris. We have some objectors to the scheme. The first one is Dan Hazelwood. If you'd like to take one of the desks and press the button to the right, you have up to 5 minutes.
Is it okay if Viv and I share, because Viv has also got a 5-minute slot as well, so our statement together is about 8 minutes long, so is that fine? Thank you very much. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dan. I live on Arnside Terrace. I'm a local resident, and this is Viv. She's a resident on Coniston Road and a member of our local community group. I'm going to start off speaking. Viv's going to talk sort of the middle section. I'm going to finish our sort of statement this afternoon. So we're here today to express our opposition to this planning application, along with some of our neighbours that we have here in the audience. And together, neighbours and local conservation groups, we have registered 90 objections so far to this proposal. Now, we obviously understand there's a need to meet housing targets, but we believe this plot is too small to accommodate a building of this size. Its riverbank location is one of the few where the River Sheaf can be seen and accessed, and the addition of 14 small apartments is not worth the adverse effect on neighbouring houses and the general amenity of the wider community. Our first concern is to do with overlooking and loss of privacy. The NPPF and the South Yorkshire Residential Design Guide states that windows should be 22 metres for the purpose of privacy and avoiding an overbearing relationship between buildings. The proposal contravenes these guidelines as the distance is only 17 metres at the northern end of Arnside Terrace to 19 metres at the southern end of Arnside Terrace. The plan has been amended to include Oriel-style windows at the rear of Block 2 facing Arnside Terrace. We feel this is a cynical attempt to demonstrate a compliant distance between the sites. Even with these windows, the alleged distance is still only 21 metres in a number of places. The future residents of Block 2 would be able to look directly into the bedrooms on Arnside Terrace. Furthermore, the public footpath will only be 15 to 17 metres from Arnside Terrace, allowing overlooking into our downstairs living spaces. While we appreciate the public footpath and its benefits to the wider public, we feel that this has been imposed on us as residents without any consultation, and are also concerned about antisocial behaviour which could take place on this public footpath. Secondly, we're concerned about the loss of light. The height of the proposal poses concern when it comes to overshadowing. The shadowing analysis in the architect's amended statement shows data for June and September, but shows no data from October to May. In June, there is no overshadowing, which can be seen again in the statement, but in images for September, that overshadowing increases considerably. Therefore, we're concerned that when it comes to December, there's going to be a complete absence of light in our gardens, and potentially, we don't know with lack of data whether it will also lead to loss of light in our downstairs living spaces as well. The architect's statement also claims that we have a high wall on our side of the River Sheaf and dense foliage that would, quote, cast shadows on our garden irrespective of the planned development. This is completely untrue, and it's based on some old irrelevant photographs, and I'm sure the councillors saw yesterday the very clear view that you have from our side of the river of the site. And it gives an inaccurate portrayal on how the overshadowing will drastically impact on our homes. Development, according to the NPPF, should seek to positively improve people's quality of life. Here, this proposal achieves the opposite, depriving Arnside Terrace of light during the key winter months.
Again, we believe the planning policy has been overlooked when it comes to the density of this proposal. This zone is designated commercial and light industrial, not residential primarily. Density recommendations are between 40 and 60 dwellings. The density for this site is 136 dwellings. So policy CS 26C and NPPF paragraphs 124 and 125 are being overlooked. Policy does allow recommendations to be exceeded so long as good design is achieved and where the character of the area is reflected. The planning officer's report recognises, quote, good design, but character of the area is not acknowledged. The proposal is clearly not in keeping with the character of our homes. The aesthetic of the development is not in keeping with local character and is of a bland design in our view. To assess the visual impact of this development, we believe a further full landscape and visual and impact assessment should be carried out. Much of the local opposition to this proposal focused on the riverbank and the associated biodiversity, and we are not convinced of the net gain being claimed. The ecological value of a green roof cannot be compared to an existing riparian environment. As you could see from the green space on the riverbank, the alleged improvement in biodiversity will not be like for like. Whilst on the spreadsheet there appears to be a net gain, in reality we will lose unique natural vegetation and wildlife. The ecological assessment views nature in numerical terms and fails to take into account existing species, including kingfishers, bats and small mammals. These will suffer adverse effects from construction, loss of habitat and additional light pollution. Furthermore, a number of trees were removed prior to this assessment being carried out. Trees suggested in the plans will likely fail due to their close proximity to these two blocks. We would like to recommend that this ecological assessment is recalculated by another ecologist to highlight the damage this proposal will have to the biodiversity in this river habitat, which is treasured by the local community.
And regarding car parking and traffic, in line with the core strategy policy CS53, this proposal should have 30 off-street car parking spaces. It has only 11. The planning officer, and I quote, considered that excessive on-street parking would not arise from the proposal, and that the proposal would not have, and I quote, any concerns that would unintentionally occur on the surrounding streets. When I read this last Thursday, I took it upon myself to walk around onto Little London Road and counted 11 vehicles parked on Little London Road along the edge of the site, 2 of these vehicles obstructing the painted cycle path, and on the adjacent 3-storey building, which you've seen in the images, which is an off-street car park, there was only 1 vehicle parked inside. Therefore, excessive on-street parking will arise from this proposal, and it will have an unacceptable impact on highway safety on Little London Road. This is a road that is, of course, part of the Sheaf Valley cycle route, and therefore this will not comply with the relevant UDP, core strategy and NPPF policies. To sort of finalise our statement, we contend this proposal does not follow national and local planning policies and regulations, and it fails to meet the Council's own guidelines for best practice and sustainability. This tiny stretch of riverbank is a 0.1 hectare and is not a suitable location for such a development. It definitely does not sit comfortably on the site. As the gentleman said at the start, it's literally sandwiched, okay, on this site. The foundations are going to obviously encroach on the riverbank habitat as well. The sequential flood tests have not been met in a high flood risk zone. We're concerned about what would actually happen in a 1 in 100-year rainfall event and expect further detailed flood modelling to be carried out to address our flood risk concerns. The proposal would adversely impact on our local amenity and create severe and cumulative highway safety issues on Little London Road. We feel that it's critically important that as you seek to improve housing supply, you also seek to build communities that people love and communities that people can be proud of in the future. We thank you for listening to our concerns and hope that today you will take the opportunity to do what we think is the right thing by rejecting this proposal and not setting a dangerous precedent that allows applicants to overlook vital planning policy that protects local communities, vital biodiversity and highway safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I allowed one further speaker, but the lady didn't give a name.
It was me, I think.
Was that you yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine then. Thank you. Chris, you like to come back and leave it up?
I can do, Chair, but I think there's a further speaker.
I'm sorry, I'm out of sync. Sorry, I apologise. We have a speaker 4, which is Andy McIntyre, please. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Andy McIntyre from Spring Planning, the agents for the application. The committee report covers the planning policy matters in detail, but there are a number of items I'd like to draw to the committee's attention. Firstly, flooding. Following detailed discussions with the applicant's professional team, the Environment Agency has confirmed that they're happy for the development to go ahead, subject to conditions which the applicant has agreed to. Eastwood's Engineers has demonstrated that there will not be any adverse flooding impact from the development. There will actually be a small net increase in flood storage of 1.9 cubic metres. The proposals also include the unblocking of the culvert under the northern end of the site, which has not been operational for some time. Once unblocked, surface water drainage from the highway will be significantly improved. Overall, the Environment Agency has concluded that there will be no negative flooding impact upon the properties on either side of the river. There will also be a substantial biodiversity net gain as a result of the development proposals of 72%. Peak Ecology undertook a full range of species and habitat surveys prior to the application being submitted and during the course of its determination. Weddell Landscape Design has proposed extensive new planting along the riverbank with a range of appropriate native species that will improve habitat for wildlife and significantly enhance the appearance of this stretch of the river. We're aware that the application has attracted a number of objections. The applicant's team have worked with the officers to address these concerns, and the applicant has amended the proposals in response. The building has been set back further and the orientation adjusted to improve the relationship with the properties on Arnside Terrace. The application has agreed to the incorporation of a publicly accessible river walkway, which will be secured by a legal agreement, and the proposed roof terrace has been removed to reduce any perceived overlooking and reduce the height of the proposals. As you hear shortly from HLM, great care has been taken with the design to ensure that no neighbouring properties will be adversely impacted. The application before the committee today was submitted following positive pre-application discussions with officers some 14 months ago. They deliver a wide range of planning benefits for the local area, including the reuse of a brownfield site for a mixed-use development in a sustainable location, the redevelopment of an eyesore site for high-quality buildings that will significantly enhance the character and appearance of the local area. We're promoting energy-efficient buildings that incorporate renewable energy technology. The provision of business floor space at ground floor level will be ideal premises for small businesses or start-ups. The proposals will activate the street frontage along Little London Road, and the provision of 14 new homes will contribute towards the city's housing supply. The applications represent sustainable development, and as concluded by the planning officers, there are no adverse impacts that outweigh the benefits of the development. Monet from HLM will now summarise the design quality of the proposals.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Monet from HLM Architects. We've been through this process over many months now with the council and with the planning officers, and we're very grateful to the support that they've given to the scheme. So, just to summarise where we're coming from, the site, as you've seen from the slides and the photographs, is a brownfield site. Essentially, it's not been used for the past few months, but it's also been used as a car park prior to that. In terms of improving the quality of the site itself, I just want to address the biodiversity before I get to the actual built environment, because that's really important to us. The car park doesn't itself have any value in terms of landscape. It's the actual river's edge, which we are looking to actually maintain and improve. If you look at the design and access statement, we are putting berming across the river edge, which is going to maintain and enhance the wildlife along it. The parking space itself, when you translate that into a 3D format, the roofs become green roofs, which will improve natural habitat. We're going to have planting of various types of mixes, which will improve biodiversity across the site, and that's where the biodiversity net gain comes from when we're looking at it as an existing car park. In terms of the actual built environment itself, through careful assessment of the site and the neighbouring buildings, we've looked to try and restrict the height of the building to 3 stories, the ground floor being undercroft parking, which serves for 11 car parks, 14 cycle parking, and then 2 commercial units. Being very close to a very well travelled public network, we've got a very good bus service going into the city centre off Abbeydale Road, so we don't really need to provide 14 cars for 14 apartments, and the 30 cars is a maximum limit. It's not what the minimum limit is. And we do want to encourage the use of public transport and sustainable green transport through the development. As we go up, the southern block, which faces Abbey Glen, which is block 1 on the drawings, that's got 6 apartments across 2 floors. The northern block's got 8 apartments across 2 floors. We're looking to activate Little London Road by having the balconies projecting out towards Little London Road to try and create a more safe and secure environment by activating that street. The ground floor commercial units on the northern block will also help with the security aspect and also create some animation across the street. The site itself, because of the geometry and the width of the site, we've tried to create animation through the use of punctuating the facades by protruding and recessing different aspects of the actual facade itself, just to try and create some interest in the architecture rather than just having a long, flat facade. And towards the back, where we've got the river sheaf, we've restricted the balconies just to block 1, which is the southern block, and that doesn't have any issues with overlooking. The northern block, which looks onto the on-site terraces, we don't have any balconies on that block. And in fact, that block, both the blocks, have got their bedrooms facing the river, not the primary living spaces, which are the living rooms and the kitchen dining areas. Those all face Little London Road. So in terms of overlooking, it's mostly the bedrooms, and those are secondary spaces when you compare them to primary living spaces. So we've taken great care to try and restrict that as much as we can. The oriel window designs, they do extend the viewing distance to 21 meters, 21 to 24 meters in fact, across the northern block, which helps with the separation distances, which we've worked with the planning officers to incorporate in the design. We've also looked at the physical separation distances between on-site terrace and the northern block, which is block 2. According to planning policy, you can provide a 25-degree separation between the ground floor of the terrace properties, and as long as that intersection point doesn't meet the new development, that is acceptable, and that is the case here. So we have met those physical requirements that are set out by planning guidance. In terms of the architecture itself, we've been quite sympathetic to the surrounding context. We've used the red brick, which is quite predominant in the terrace housing, and we've taken cues from the new development with the grey cladding to try and accentuate the entrances to these blocks, to try and generate a bit of interest along the facade as well. We've dropped the parapet heights to reduce any overshadowing on on-site terrace, and the overshadowing that does happen in the winter months, that's restricted to a little bit of the terrace area, but it doesn't actually extend up to the houses. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll go back to the beginning. So the first speakers collectively spoke about overlooking. And yeah, if I can use the slides here, please. I'm looking for... Sorry, it'd help if I had these to hand, but... yeah, sorry. If you go back to one of the earlier floor plan images, we'll start there, I think. So in terms of the properties on on-site terrace, there's been reference made to 17 to 19 metre distances, which are as quoted in the report. And that is from, obviously what you're looking at there is a ground stroke undercroft floor plan at the top, and then the upper floors below. And in those, if you like, jagged top portions of that lower drawing are the oriel windows. And if there's only one side of those window forms that contains glass. The other is a solid wall. And the intention of that is to divert the view into a particular direction rather than promote and allow a direct view in a straight line across. Now, clearly, if you're stood in certain parts of the room, you would still be able to see directly across, but it does tend to draw the view in a more angled direction. It's quite difficult to pick out here, but on the small plan at the top, you can see the relationship of that block, which is red, to the terrace properties across. And that's where you've got the 17 to 19 metre distance. I think both speakers for and against have pointed out that the directional change in those oriel windows takes that distance to in the order of 21 metres. What we've said in the report is that that does fall below, if you take the straight line, that does fall below our guideline figure of 21 metres. However, members are probably quite familiar with a number of examples where we don't, for want of a better expression, slavishly adhere to that guidance. So often where there is intervening land or a street, then distances can be quite a bit narrower than that. So, for instance, in the traditional residential terrace streets to the west of the river, there will be a number of relationships where that distance from window to window, ground floor, habitable rooms and bedrooms, is considerably less than 21 metres. It might only be in the order of about 8 or 10 metres in some instances. I accept this is a slightly different situation in that this is a development that's been introduced to an existing area. But the presence of the river is an intervening portion of land. And in addition to that, the fronts of those properties are, it's not communal land, it's not a communal garden, I'm not suggesting that at all. But as we say within the report, it is an area where people pass and repass, albeit people that are familiar to the people that are living there generally. So, in a nutshell, what we're saying there is that context, we feel, justifies a slightly shorter distance than the guideline, and in addition, the applicants introduced a number of measures to alleviate that. So that's why we feel that that overlooking concern isn't one that would warrant a refusal of permission in this case. In terms of loss of light, again, the separation here we feel is enough to result in a satisfactory situation. There are more challenging situations within the Abbey Glen development to the south. Again, that's a development which was built almost at the same time, so people know what they're getting to some extent, as opposed to a development that's been introduced. But a study has been undertaken in the summer months, but also in September, and we feel usually the most appropriate measurements are around kind of September, March, as summer's turning into autumn or the beginning of spring, if you like, because that's quite a typical level rather than a situation in the summer where the sun is very high or in winter when the sun is very low. So a more kind of reasonable judgment is around sort of September, October time, or March, April, and we felt that the study that was submitted for September, which shows the shadowing at sort of 4 p.m, 10 p.m, just encroaching into the gardens on Arnside Terrace, we felt that was a satisfactory justification for that scale of development there in terms of light. Density was raised, and yes, this is higher than the densities that are identified in the core strategy. That is always the case when it's an apartment scheme as opposed to individual dwellings, just by the very nature of them. But also, since the core strategy, the NPPF very much encourages maximising densities of land in response to national concern about housing shortage, as well as our own local one. So, for the reasons we've explained in the report, we feel that's acceptable. We don't think it results in an inappropriate design, so we're happy to support that high level of density. I'll ask Helen probably at the end to comment on the parking matters, I think. And to comment, I think for me, 2 more points. On the flood risk, I don't know if I made myself clear at the beginning in terms of sequential test. The sequential test is around almost like a principle, is I think the best way of describing it, of establishing that the first choice ought to be on development on sites which aren't at risk of flooding. And so what the policy requires, the national policy requires, is that applicants explore that first. We have found, and this occurs locally and nationally, situations where developments of a certain size or type, a developer will say, we acknowledge that this can be accommodated on land which is at lower risk of flooding. But we have done X, Y and Z to ensure our development is flood resilient, that it doesn't result in increased flood risk elsewhere, and that's been demonstrated here. So we haven't just set aside the flood risk issues, we've acknowledged that the sequential test hasn't been followed, but the detailed flood risk assessment has, and has been scrutinised by the Environment Agency on more than one occasion. And they've confirmed, they removed an initial objection and have now confirmed they have no objection to the scheme. And as pointed out by the second speakers, this does actually introduce some benefits in flood risk terms, in that there's a small portion of, if you like, flood storage on the site with the changes to the site, and also the surface water runoff from the site will be less after this scheme than what it currently is, because of the measures that are being put in place and required by policy. So the only other point I wanted to just confirm to members, again using the images if I can, if we leave that one there for now, on that block, the applicant's correct, all the balconies are located on the Little London Road frontage. They're relatively small, they're in the order of 3 metres squared, or 3 square metres for each unit, which is enough for someone to put a small bistro set on and sit outside. And then on the other block, which we could move to that please, there is a mixture. That block, yes, thank you. So the blue units, they contain a balcony on the riverside, which faces the blank gable wall and rear garden of the properties on the end of Arnside Terrace, if we've got the right road there.
Arnside Road.
Arnside Road, sorry, yes. But that also does contain balconies on the Little London Road frontage for the other flats, just in case members weren't certain where they were. If we could ask Helen, please, to comment on the highways points that were made.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to clarify, in terms of the parking guidelines, they are actually maximum guidelines and not minimums that have to be adhered to. Obviously, when we're considering proposals in terms of parking, we'll look at the type of development in terms of flats, individual dwelling houses, because they tend to have different parking characteristics. We also look at the location in terms of access to goods facilities, shops and public services, and also access to public transport. That's all being considered as part of this application, and we feel that it is a site that can accept the limited parking. It's also in an attempt to encourage more active travel, which again we feel the site is well located to do that, so we do feel that the parking provision is acceptable in this instance and won't result in a significant adverse impact on the adjacent highway network. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Right, we'll open up to members' questions. Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't know whether I caught everything that you said, but a comment was made with regard to on-street parking and the Sheaf cycle network, that if there was on-street parking, that would conflict with the network. Can you sort of talk about that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think as I was saying, I mean, yes, I do accept that there is already some on-street parking on Little London Road. The view is that the type of development that we're looking at, the location, in terms of accessibility to public transport, also in terms of accessibility to facility shops, that type of thing. The actual nature of the development in terms of being apartments as opposed to really what we would call family housing, that the level of parking provision is acceptable for that type of use and will not result in a significant amount of on-street parking that would be detrimental to highway safety. So that would be the Sheaf Valley cycle route, other motorised users or pedestrians for that matter. Thank you.
Henry?
Okay, to carry on the same sort of thread, and apologies for that, the same arguments were used in relation to the Abbey Glen development, but that has seen increased levels of on-street parking. Do we have any reason to believe that the nature of this development will lead to lower levels of car ownership per unit than either Abbey Glen or the wider area?
Thanks, Chair. I think that certainly saying Abbey Glen has caused more on-street parking, but yet at the same time, we're told that there are spaces available in the Abbey Glen, development that aren't used. So my question would be, are we absolutely certain that the on-street parking is caused by Abbey Glen? I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't. As I say, we have assessed this on the basis of the location of the site, the type of unit that we're looking at, the likely type of resident that is going to be living there in terms of it's unlikely to be family housing, the fact that it is accessible to public transport. We are trying to encourage active modes of transport and actively discourage vehicular usage. And that is why we've considered that a limited parking scheme is acceptable. If we say that, everybody is going to own one car in that property, so we could end up, with demand for 3 on-street parking spaces, that would not be a severe highway impact, and it certainly wouldn't justify refusal of the application. Thank you, Chair.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about flooding. I appreciate that a culvert nearby is being unblocked. I think it's a bit worrying that it was blocked up in the first place. But going back to the flood in 2007, was this area underwater? And if so, by how much?
I don't know the answer to that, Chair, with any certainty.
You live there.
I can't, so it's wrong of me to try and answer it.
It wasn't underwater, but we are in a severe flood zone, and we all got phone calls and every other message possible telling us to be very aware and to move ourselves upstairs. I live next to the river, and it was in torrent with large trees bowling down in a very frightening way. We're also aware that the Bannerdale Brook is a confluence at this very point.
Can I please cut you off there?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you've made the point, thank you. Anne?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine's in relation, going back to the on-street parking, and it's just a query about the commercial units that are going to be underneath. What type of units are these going to be, and are they going to encourage more on-street parking? I don't know, just for an example, if they're cafes or whatever, is that also going to encourage on-street parking in the local area and actually encourage a lot more than what would be in the, housing development scheme? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously we have considered this, but I think the basis is that they are relatively limited size of commercial units. And the view is that it's unlikely to be uses that are going to be attractors of traffic in their own right, if you like. It's more likely that they're going to be uses that would be people who are already in the area. And so, yes, I'm not saying that they couldn't generate any level of on-street parking demand, because that would be foolish to say that. But the view is that it wouldn't be of such a magnitude as to warrant a highway safety issue. Again, we accept that servicing, which would be relatively limited for those units, will have to be carried out from on-street, but that is the case with many, many areas around the city. Thank you, Chair.
Chris?
No, Chair, other than to say that the uses applied for are under Class E, which has relatively recently been introduced by the government, which covers a very wide range of uses. So they're not specified at this stage, and that's to allow market flexibility. So we can't answer what the use will be at this moment in time. We know what the range will be, which is quite wide. But as Helen said, the small-scale units in any event.
Thanks, Chris. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Helen, continue with the highway situation. It's not part of planning, I presume, anyway, to decide, to ask the question whether these will be allocated, these spaces will be allocated to particular apartments, or whether they will be hot-bedded and there will be a circulation. But if, for example, they are not hot-bedded, then that could cause a problem on the road. If it's hot-bedded, then anybody can park there, and that would relieve part of a problem that could occur. I'm not saying it would occur, but it could occur. And the second question, if you can remember it first, is about the exit and entry of cars or bikes into that bay, and how does it occur? Are there two exit? Are there 2 points, one for exit and one for entry? Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Chair. To answer the second point first, because I think that's the easiest one. No, basically it's going to operate as a one-way system, because so basically there'll be one entry and one exit. It's really got to operate like that because of the width or the depth of the site. Because obviously you're not going to be able to get the parking and two cars getting past, so it has got to operate on a one-way system. We were mindful that the spaces are relatively restricted, and the layout has been fully tracked to make sure that the spaces are feasible to use, because obviously there's no point in providing them if they're not feasible to use. So we're quite comfortable that they can be used. In terms of the egress from the site, the sight lines are acceptable and in accordance with the speed limit of the road. In relation to the question of parking, it hasn't been clarified whether they are allocated spaces or whether they are on a communal basis. So I can't, as you say, I think if they are available on a communal basis, that does allow, some sort of flexibility that is beneficial. But even if they are on an allocated basis, so we can sort of say, 3 flats may be short of a space, as I mentioned earlier, we don't feel that would be a significant highway safety problem by the likely demand of parking that could be created. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of my questions have been raised, but just want to come back on the consultation. Just hearing from residents who living in the area, and it's just because the consultation has that spoke entirely, how thorough was it in terms of making sure that the residents that are living in the area who may not be aware or who it may impact hugely on, have they been involved? Because I'm just listening to a few that the consultation, they weren't aware. And just picking on one of the things is the loss of light and the consultation around June and September. Is there a possibility of further consulting around the later November, December? The reason why I've just picked that up is because impacting on people's lives who are already living there or will be living there, the light element is very important, especially working in the health field, mental health. I have seen, you know, the level of huge impact it can have on people's health and well-being if that light element, and sometimes it feels it's not much of a difference it will make, but it could make a huge difference on people's lives, and that bit of life could make their well-being, you know, a huge difference. So it's just something I thought maybe you've already looked into it, but that was something I just wanted to highlight.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. The notification undertaken by our consultation is often referred to in two scenarios, really. One, any consultation undertaken by the applicant, which we don't have any control over and isn't mandatory, and our own publicity, our code of practice on publicity, our statement of community involvement. And the publicity that we undertook as part of this application was firmly in line with that. So the neighbour notification exercise was in line with our practice published guidance. We've had, as the speaker said, we've had in the order of 90 objections. So there's clearly been an awareness of it in the community, whether that's directly from our own contact or word of mouth. So I'm satisfied that the consultation was done correctly, certainly from the process of the planning application perspective. And I can only really repeat myself about the comment on light and the reliance on a study that refers to September. My view is that that's a reasonable period of the year to assess that. There are very few properties that around the city that aren't casting shadow in the winter months when the sunlight is very low, and you would enormously limit development if we relied upon that impact. If that impact, because it is likely that clearly it's fairly obvious that a study in December, for example, would show a greater level of, or potentially show a greater level of overshadowing, depending on topography and other landforms around. But it would severely restrict development if we went down that route. We feel that the September or sometimes March is used as an alternative is the most reasonable time to assess impact on light. And the shadow, as I say, showed the shadow from the development onto on-side terrace properties. I would say approximately a third of the way along their gardens. So there was still a gap to go before it got to the properties themselves. That's all I can really say on that, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. I've got Henry next and then Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to the issue of biodiversity on the site and applaud the amendments to Condition 32 because I felt that the 5-year management of the green roof was inadequate. It seems that the claim to a net gain of biodiversity for the development hinges on the work to the riverbank and the successful management and the composition of the green roof itself. As a baseline survey has been carried out for the biodiversity of the site, will a follow-up survey be being carried out to ensure that there has actually been a net gain following the development?
Chair, there's no requirement within the condition for that to happen, for a re-evaluation on completion. What there is a requirement for those works to be undertaken in accordance with full details to be submitted. So it's through that process that we would be satisfied that the work had been undertaken, and that work is based on a prediction, but we're satisfied that that is a reasonable prediction. A reminder on net gain: it's strongly encouraged is probably an appropriate phrase within the MPPF to achieve net gain. The mandatory requirement on developers doesn't come into force until November 23. But yeah, there is what the information provided indicates is a 72% enhancement on the site and around a 5% enhancement of the riverbank. So obviously it's much easier to enhance what is the site in its current form because it's quite low value. And the introduction of the green roof and the other elements of planting achieve quite an uplift in that. The riverbank already has a level of biodiversity impacted somewhat by invasive species, but with the advice suggests, and we've no reason to contradict it, that there would be an uplift in that too of around 5%. But to answer the question, no, there's no requirement to re-evaluate it on completion.
Thanks, Chris. Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. First thing's a comment. Listening to this debate, it makes it sound like a very clinical process between the proposers of the plan, planning officers, and sort of until everything's decided until you've ticked all the boxes. And that is the impression. That's your job, that's our officer's job. We've got to decide whether the planning requirements have been met. And I regret that. But, I mean, so that's a comment, frustration, if you like. Now, the thing about car ownership, time and time again in this chamber, we've heard the justification for reducing parking spaces, increasing density, is that sort of we're going to encourage active travel, but we're not actually doing anything to ensure that happens. Our bus routes, our bus services are in a state of flux. There's bus lanes. People in those properties they may take active travel, walk or cycle into the centre, but they still want a car to take their bikes outside of the city centre for recreational purposes. Can we do anything to ensure that car ownership is restricted for any development, this development, any other developments? You know, that's the first thing. I suspect the answer is no, but I honestly feel quite strongly about that because the justification, we're promoting active travel without anything to actually implement that. The other thing I'm worried about is the canalisation of the river. It's been commented in the plans. Now, on site yesterday, I must admit, it is attractive. I do sympathise with the residents, even though I can't allow that to influence what we've got to decide. But I was very conscious that the whole stretch of river, it'd be for at least 100 metres, will be canalised. Now, kids mess about. Is there going to be any sort of way that a kid, sort of say, falling off the walkway can get back up? Not even in sort of flood time, but sort of in ordinary time, because looking at that stretch, I'm not too sure how far walls on both sides will actually stretch and whether there is a liability. And should we actually be considering putting in some access point from the development, especially as it's a public walkway? And I think there was another point I was going to make. Oh, and it was another, just a question really. On page 107, policy CS64, it says the sustainability homes level has been superseded. Now, the way that paragraph reads, do I assume that sort of the current conditions are an improvement on that? Because the way it reads suggests it may have been sort of, you know, the requirements might be lessened. Thank you.
Chair, I'll make a first stab at answering the car ownership question. Helen might want to come into it at a later date. I mean, through a planning permission, it's extremely difficult to prevent car ownership, almost impossible, I would imagine. In the past, we've had things such as developments within permit parking areas where we've, through the planning permission, restricted access to permits. That practice is no longer our current practice. Instead, parking services assess the level of car ownership within that area before deciding whether or not to issue a permit. However, reduced parking guidelines or avoiding over-provision of car parking is a key method of encouraging reduced car ownership. It's not it doesn't directly of itself prevent people from owning vehicles, but to provide accommodation with reduced car parking opportunities in planning policy terms and transport policy terms is a method of attempting to limit reliance on a car, not necessarily stop people from owning one. Helen might want to add a bit more about what we're doing generally as well. In terms of the works to the river, there will be railings on the riverside which will have to be compliant, that would be there to prevent someone falling over. Whether someone actively seeks to climb over, I don't think that's something that the application could reasonably be expected to deal with, Chair. And in that sense, it's not much different to the wall at the end of Arnside Road, which will be of a similar height that someone could scale and climb into the river. And so far as the reference to the what we used to have, which was the Code for Sustainable Homes Level 3, it is now quite some time since that's been removed from a planning authority's armoury, if you like. But other changes since then, including things like the building regulations, have caught up with that, in some cases overtaken it. And our policy that we are able to employ is essentially the requirement for a 10% reduction in energy levels, which this scheme is at least indicating it would achieve, and there is a condition that requires that to ensure it happens. I don't know if Helen wants to say any more about the car parking situation.
Thanks, Chair. I think that you're exactly right. No, we can't tell people they can't own cars, basically. What I can say is, though, that as part of this sort of transport capital programme, there is a huge and really huge emphasis on improvements to cycling, walking, public transport, whether it be bus lanes, whether it be facilities to improve, to improve the timings of the buses. I appreciate that this is something that is in the future, or that it's something that's happening now. These things are going and these things have been progressed. But the problem is, if we provide, I don't know, 2 parking spaces per dwelling for everywhere, we are encouraging people to do that. And yes, I appreciate that it isn't an ideal situation, but I think the thing is, at the moment, we have got these plans in process. We have got them in design. We have got them, that are going to be on street very soon. But we've also got to sort of try and consider, well, is this a reasonable type of development to have as a limited, parking development? If it was individual houses that were more likely to be occupied by families, then we may say, well, no, no, it's not really. If it was not in such an accessible location, then we would be trying to get the higher provision of parking. But I think in this location, with the type of residential dwellings that they're going to be, I do feel that, it will be acceptable in this location, in this instance, sorry. Thank you.
thank you both for that. I have to accept your answer, but it really, you know, it's just a shame we can't do much and have a provision for developers that sort of, you know, can you specify that sort of future occupants, there's a covenant on future occupants for A, B or C, but I accept the situation as it is now. Thank you, Chair.
Comments, please. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't expecting to be first, but having looked at this overall, and given the fact that the applicants have taken on board criticisms and amended their plans, and having heard other contributions, I know overlooking is a problem, but given the distances involved, it's not unlike many other street scenes. I think you could go up and down most streets, and if you really wanted to stop and stare, you can stare into people's houses, but this would be across a river, so I think the complaints about people standing on the walkway looking across the river to other houses isn't particularly strong. Similarly, if I'd been told that there had been extensive flooding over that land, I would be deeply concerned about this development. That clearly isn't the case, although clearly it did affect other areas back in 2007. I'm trying to come up with a good planning reason for overturning this, but you know, rejecting the application. But overall, it is a development that is not untypical in an urban street scene. And I think if it were factory that were being built on that site, I think there would be more cause for complaint. So, Chair, I'm going to support this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, all these planning questions that come to the board are difficult ones and controversial. I thought the case put by the residents was extremely well argued, and I'm sorry, but the question of tilting the balance in this case does favour the building of extra residences, which I think will probably go to people that are early startups, or it may be people that are living on their own. So it's very likely, it's unlikely that there will be families living in the one-bedroom or even the two-bedroom apartments that are assigned to this block. So I think, on balance, and because the actual area does need as enhancing, because it looks in a very poor state, actually, and although originally it was, of course, mainly industrial area. So I'm going to say that I'm going to agree with the colleague over there that says that it's difficult on planning terms to overturn this. So on balance, I shall vote for it.
Thank you, Roger. Any further comments? Cliff?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, overall I like this, but I do have concerns about loss of light, particularly in winter, in the winter months. Now, if there was a building proposed which was lower, that would be better from that perspective. But that said, that's not what's on the papers today, so I will reluctantly be voting in favour of it.
Thank you, Cliff. Diane?
Thank you, Chair. I do feel for residents. They've had building already, and there is more building going to happen on the other side of the river. But looking at the development that is put before us, which is what we're required to do, and listening to the questions that we've asked, reviewing the questions that we've asked over the previous months about the size of the properties which exceed design guide requirements, the provision of balconies which overlook a street scene and increase safety there, public safety, EV chargers, green roof, the provision of PV panels, the restricted parking that enhances the active travel schemes, the provision of 2 local shops, the uncovering of a culvert, which is positive, the provision of a walkway at the side of the river, and the treatment of invasive species, the Himalayan balsam and the Japanese knotweed. I have to say, these developers have listened to most of the criticisms that we've had of developments and schemes that have come before us in recent years. And with the existence of the tilted balance, I can acknowledge that existing residents have concerns about this development, but I can't find any planning reason for refusing it, and so I'll be voting in favour. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Diane. Henry?
I'm basically going to echo the thoughts of the other councillors that have already been stated, in that the objections put forward by the residents were well researched, well put forward. Unfortunately, with the application of tilted balance, I'm going to approve it, but I would like to draw attention to page 83 of the planning application, where there's a reference to public art, but the location hasn't been decided. And if that location could benefit the residents of Arnside Terrace and Arnside Road, I would applaud that.
Thank you, Henry. No further comments?
So, yeah, sorry, I'd just like to make a comment. I know I'm not allowed, but I'll continue, all due respect.
No, I'm sorry, but
no, I'm going to
you've
continue.
had
So
your 5
I just want to
minutes.
make clear that since 2007, our cellars have flooded. Okay, I believe in 2018 or 2019.
2007, Little London Road flooded as well.
But our cellars flood, okay, and I'm not convinced that the canalisation of the river is not going to have an effect on flooding of our cellars and have a negative consequence on that. So although the surface flooding might not be an issue, we do have movement of water through the water table. So I'd like, I think that's a massive point that's going to have a huge issue on us, is both on Arnside Road and on Arnside Terrace.
I'm going to move to the vote. No further members' comments? No? Henry?
For the granting of planning permission.
Mike?
For the recommendation, Chair.
Anne?
For the recommendation, Chair.
Yeah.
For the recommendation, but I do have those concerns with the flooding side of the street.
Tony?
Yeah, reluctantly for.
Diane?
For, Chair.
Roger?
Yes, with reservations, I'm voting for it.
Bob?
For, Chair.
Cliff?
For, Chair.
Tom?
For.
Barbara?
Reluctant for, Chair.
That proposal is passed. Thank you all very much. Thank you. We have any other business? Pardon? Oh, sorry. Yeah, the date for the next meeting is 13th of September, 2 p.m. Thank you very much. And we have any other business? Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. I note that a number of Y7 pupils from the Edward VII School have made submissions in respect of this planning application for Little London Road. As some may be watching or have watched these proceedings, can we propose to thank them for their interest, welcome their concerns, especially for the natural environment, for biodiversity and climate change, and for engaging with the planning process, Can I ask the Planning Committee to approve a letter to the group thanking them for their contributions which form part of the public record for this planning application, an invitation to come and observe the committee at work, an indication how concerns over the environment, biodiversity and climate change are addressed in the planning process, and encourage them to maintain an active interest in the future developments of our city and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Do we have any comments on that? I mean, Diane and myself have discussed this, and Abby will put a letter together which Diane and I will sign as joint chairs. Do we have a nod of agreement on that, please? Yeah? Thank you. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much.